Hello and welcome. It's my pleasure to introduce Jessica Fries from A4S, that's Accounting for Sustainability. Jessica has overall leadership responsibility for the organisation. She's led A4S since 2008, working with the finance community to catalyse a shift to a sustainable economy with a focus on practical actions and targeted interventions capable of achieving global change. She is currently a member of the International Integrated Reporting Council Governance and Nominations Committee, the Smith School Global Sustainable Finance Advisory Council, the UN Global Assessment Report Advisory Council, and the Global Reporting Initiative Board. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Caroline.
So, Jessica, I'd like to start by asking what observations you have in terms of the COVID-19 impact on the business sector and its implications for sustainable finance.
Prior to the crisis, we saw a real uptake and focus on issues like climate change and broader sustainability issues, so some of the social and environmental drivers of business performance. And amongst the investor community, a real demand for better information from companies and interest in sustainable finance. We have networks of CFOs around the world, as well as asset owners and others from the capital market community. And we've been engaging with them to really understand their perspectives. And they come from the whole range of sectors. So some that have been very heavily impacted by the current crisis, others that have been having to find ways of working, so different sets of challenges. What we are finding is, based on some emerging market research and of course anecdotally, I think it's a bit early to say, but those that had really managed to think about embedding sustainability into their business are finding ways to maybe weather the crisis better than some of those who aren't. And certainly from the investor community, I think a real still focus on and demand from companies to be demonstrating how they are responding to the crisis in a positive way, particularly some of those social dimensions. So thinking about how companies are supporting their employees, supporting their communities, supporting society as a whole in responding to the crisis. And I think that sustainable finance plays a really important role in that response.
So the mindset is kind of changing through the impact of COVID-19.
The mindset is absolutely changing. I mean, everyone, I think, is having to focus on some of the very short-term survival issues. But at the same time, those longer-term sustainability drivers aren't going away. And a lot of organisations are really thinking about what do they need to put in place now that is going to help them not only come out of the crisis still surviving, but are there opportunities that might mean that they can retain some of the learnings from the crisis and be building back better, I think is a phrase that's really started to gain a lot of traction. And whether that is around the social dimensions or around some of those environmental changes. But I think that for many, there's a more profound sense of the interconnectedness of action and things like the resilience of the supply chain, the social responses, how dependent we are on some of the ways of working with others, ways of working with across communities, with government, with other business partners to really find solutions. And I think that some of those areas really give me hope for how we can do things differently in the future.
Thanks very much, Jessica. And I think our audience is going to be really interested to know that A4S is a newly published set of top tips for Treasury teams on implementing a sustainable finance framework. What are the key benefits to the Treasurer and its company or their company as a result of implementing such a framework?
Well, as mentioned, pre-crisis was a real focus on sustainable finance, and a lot of the CFOs and companies we've been working with around the world have been starting to issue green bonds, social bonds, sustainability bonds, but not just bonds, but also other aspects of sustainable finance. So revolving credit facilities, for example, with sustainability related KPIs that drive differential pricing. And we have seen a continued focus on some of those products through the crisis. And a sustainable finance framework is a way for Treasury teams to join the dots, put a framework around some of those products that they might want to be issuing to help them do it in a way that really drives best practice. And I think there's a number of benefits that we've seen. So one is for Treasury teams to be taking advantage of the market interest in this area. And we've seen recently a real uptick in social bond issuance. So there's research by Nordea that really shows about 20% of the recent issuance has been focused on some of those social issues. But also really initiate a different kind of dialogue with market participants. Of course, from an internal perspective, I think there are real benefits from thinking about sustainable finance. I think it can help Treasury teams drive a different kind of dialogue internally and across the company, support the company, of course, to achieve its own sustainable strategy, and act as that real champion within the business. And finally, of course, really help to contribute to a more sustainable economy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jessica. So there are 5 top tips. Would you like to summarise those for us, please?
Absolutely. So the 5 top tips are based on insights from the Treasury teams we've worked with. So they've been drawing together the lessons learned from treasurers who themselves have been putting in place sustainable finance frameworks and their experience issuing sustainability related products in the market. It builds on the A4S Essential Guide, which we issued last year, which focuses on debt finance. So that guide really looks at all aspects of Treasury team activity and how to embed ESG, environmental, social and governance issues into all of the things that Treasury teams do. But this top tips really gives people a great starting point. It helps people to get going in terms of accessing that sustainable finance market. And there are 5 areas that really came through very strongly in terms of actions for Treasury teams to take. And I think that there's some good general principles. So the first one, in terms of how do you get started, thinking about looking at the experience of others. So we've included a lot of links to existing sustainable finance frameworks in the top tips document, so people can have a look at what others are doing and learn from them. And of course, leverage international best practice. So there are quite a few sets of principles really guiding what good looks like. And we really recommend looking at some of those principles and drawing on them. And again, they're summarised in the top tips. Next, of course, is how do you test and refine that framework? So you need to get internal buy-in and think through feedback, both internally and then, of course, from the external market. So implementing that framework. A lot of organisations, I think, have started off reasonably small. So maybe just cover some of the priority areas and products that they might want to access. So for a lot of companies, that might be a green bond. And really thinking about how the proceeds that they can raise are going to support maybe initiatives around climate change, energy reduction. But in the current context, I think it's really worth thinking about some of those social financing opportunities as well. And then, of course, as the experience builds within the organisation, so the 4th area, the 4th top tip, is around how you build momentum. So how do you engage more widely with stakeholders? How do you learn from your experiences? And then start to expand the scope of that sustainable finance framework. So the 5th top tip is really how do you enhance and expand that experience? And ultimately, what we've seen some companies thinking about is how can all of their financing activities be covered by their sustainable finance framework. So I think in the long term, your sustainable finance framework would be your finance framework governing how you would access the markets for all finance. But a good place to start is really thinking about the sustainable finance market itself. So green, social, sustainable development goals and sustainability financing.
Well, fantastic, Jessica. I mean, that kind of vision, that's really something I think for us all to work towards. But as you say, just starting out, I think a lot of our treasurers have struggled to think, well, where do I begin? So this is really a fantastic piece of work, and delighted that you've been able to tell us a little bit more about it today. Now, is there any final message you'd like to give our Treasury community today, Jessica?
I would say get started. So don't be scared of starting small. The market continues to have real appetite for bonds and other products in this area. So it's really worthwhile in the current context thinking about how you can access that market, how you can strengthen your relationships, build support internally, and really raise the kind of finance that you need and support positive impacts and action.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jessica, and thanks for joining us here today. But thanks also for all the work you do partnering with us on in various contexts. We really appreciate it. It's a really important area that we do need to focus on more, and it will be really fascinating to see out of the current situation under COVID-19 how things develop, and whether things are indeed fast-tracked, or there's a shift caused by the kind of disruption, shall we say, that we're experiencing. So hopefully all to the good for the cause. Thank you once again, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. I hope you found that helpful, and I hope you'll all now be racing out to track down your top tips and have a good read of those and get started. Thank you very much.